Long, long ago, the land we now call the United States was not empty. It was full of life and people. These first people are now called Native Americans or indigenous peoples. They came to the continent thousands of years before anyone else, traveling across a land bridge from Asia. Over many centuries, they spread out across the vast lands of North and South America. They formed many different nations and cultures, each with its own language, traditions, and way of life. Some were hunters, following herds of bison across the Great Plains. Others were farmers, growing corn, beans, and squash in settled villages. These diverse groups lived in harmony with the land, understanding its seasons and its secrets. They built amazing cities, like the cliff dwellings in the Southwest and the great mound cities along the Mississippi River. They created beautiful art, told powerful stories, and developed complex systems of government. Their world was rich and complete. They did not know that far across the great Atlantic Ocean, another world existed. The people in Europe had no idea that this huge continent was here, waiting to be found. For thousands of years, these two parts of the world grew and changed, completely separate from one another. Then, about 500 years ago, that separation ended. Explorers from Europe, countries like Spain, France, and England, began to sail across the ocean in big ships. Christopher Columbus was one of the first to arrive in 1492, thinking he had reached Asia. His arrival marked the beginning of enormous changes for the people already living in the Americas. Soon, more ships came, carrying soldiers, missionaries, and settlers. These newcomers were looking for gold, land, and new opportunities. They brought with them things the Native Americans had never seen before, like horses, steel tools, and guns. The arrival of the Europeans was a very difficult time for the Native Americans. The newcomers also brought diseases, like smallpox, which the indigenous people had no immunity against. These sicknesses spread rapidly and tragically wiped out millions of people, sometimes entire communities. At the same time, the European countries began to claim large pieces of land for themselves. England started colonies along the Atlantic coast, which would later grow into the 13 colonies. These settlements brought more and more people from Europe, forever changing the landscape and the lives of the first people of America. As the years passed, the 13 English colonies grew and prospered. People came from England and other parts of Europe seeking religious freedom or a chance to build a better life. The colonies developed their own economies and ways of doing things. In the north, people built towns and focused on trade and shipbuilding. In the south, the warm climate was perfect for growing crops like tobacco and cotton on large farms called plantations. This created a great demand for workers, leading to the terrible system of slavery, where millions of people from Africa were forced to come to America and work without pay. The colonies were ruled by Great Britain, a powerful country across the ocean. The British king and government made laws for the colonists and taxed them to pay for wars and other expenses. For a long time, the colonists accepted this rule. But over time, they began to feel that it was unfair. They had no representatives in the British government to speak for them. They felt they were being taxed without their consent, leading to the famous cry, "No taxation without representation." People like Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry began to speak out, arguing that the colonists should have the same rights as people living in England. Tensions grew higher and higher between the colonies and Great Britain. The British sent soldiers to the colonies to enforce their laws, which only made the colonists angrier. Small fights broke out, like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, where colonists threw British tea into the harbor to protest attacks. Finally, the leaders from the 13 colonies decided to meet together in a group called the Continental Congress. They tried to find a peaceful solution, but it became clear that they wanted something different from what the king wanted. They wanted to be in charge of their own future. On July 4, 1776, these leaders took a very brave step. They signed a document called the Declaration of Independence. Written mostly by Thomas Jefferson, it announced to the world that the 13 colonies were now free and independent states, no longer part of Great Britain. The document declared that all people have certain rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This act of declaring independence started a long and difficult war, the American Revolutionary War. A general named George Washington led the colonial army against the powerful British forces, and after years of struggle, the Americans won their freedom. After winning the war, the new United States of America had to create a government. The leaders wrote the Constitution, a set of rules for how the country would be run. It created a system with a president, a Congress, and courts to make sure power was balanced. George Washington, the hero of the war, was elected as the first president. The country began to grow, with people moving westward to find new land and build new lives. But a deep and difficult problem was growing right along with the nation. This problem was slavery, which was still legal in the southern states. The country was divided. In the northern states, the economy was based on factories and industry, and slavery was slowly abolished. People in the north began to see slavery as morally wrong. In the southern states, the economy depended heavily on plantations where enslaved African Americans were forced to work. Southern leaders believed they needed slavery to survive, and felt the northern states should not interfere with their way of life. This disagreement became the biggest issue in the country. Brave people like Harriet Tubman helped enslaved people escape to freedom through the Underground Railroad. But the conflict only grew worse. The tension finally exploded in 1861 with the start of the Civil War. A group of southern states decided to leave the United States and form their own country, called the Confederacy. The president at the time was Abraham Lincoln. He believed that the country must stay together as one nation. The war that followed was the deadliest in American history, pitting brother against brother. The fighting was fierce and lasted for 4 long years, causing immense suffering and destruction across the land. The Union Army of the North fought against the Confederate Army of the South. Abraham Lincoln made a historic decision during the war. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all enslaved people in the rebelling southern states were free. This changed the purpose of the war, making it a fight not just to save the Union, but also to end slavery. In 1865, the North won the war, and the country was reunited. Soon after, the Constitution was changed to officially end slavery everywhere in the United States. The period after the war, called Reconstruction, was a time of trying to rebuild the South and define what freedom meant for the newly freed African Americans. It was a difficult and complicated time, but it set the stage for a new chapter in American history. With the Civil War over, the United States turned its attention westward. The government encouraged people to move into the vast territories between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean. This period is known as westward expansion. Millions of settlers, including American-born families and new immigrants from Europe and Asia, traveled west in covered wagons, on trains, and on foot. They were drawn by the promise of cheap land and the dream of starting a new life. They built farms, ranches, and new towns, slowly filling up the continent. This movement was seen as the nation's manifest destiny, the belief that it was destined to stretch from coast to coast. This westward movement had a devastating impact on the Native American nations who had lived on these lands for centuries. As settlers and railroads pushed west, they clashed with the indigenous peoples over land and resources. The U.S. government broke many treaties it had made with Native American tribes and used its army to force them onto small, designated areas called reservations. The bison, which were central to the way of life for many Plains Indians, were hunted to near extinction. This period was marked by many tragic conflicts and the loss of land, culture, and life for Native Americans. At the same time, the country was changing in other ways. The late 1800s and early 1900s saw a huge boom in industry. New inventions like the telephone and the electric light bulb changed daily life. Giant factories were built, and cities grew bigger and bigger as people moved from farms to find work. Millions of immigrants arrived from all over the world, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, seeking jobs and a better future. They worked in the factories, built railroads, and added their own cultures to the growing American mix. Life in the crowded cities could be hard, but these immigrants helped build the modern nation. By the 20th century, the United States had become a major world power. It fought in 2 world wars and played a leading role in global events. At home, the country continued to struggle with its ideals of freedom and equality. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., fought to end racial segregation and secure equal rights for African Americans. Today, the United States is a large and powerful country made up of people from every corner of the globe. It is a nation of many different cultures, languages, and traditions, a place that is still shaped by its long and epic journey through history.